I started with short-term rentals back in 2018 with my wife, and now we've grown it into a company with over 150 listings, and we're continuing to grow.
Partnering up with other people, it's like getting married. You got to make sure you're doing it with the right person.
My wife was the one who pushed us. She said, are we just going to talk about this until we die, or are we actually going to do something?
Now you're getting into commercial financing. What was different there in terms of how you guys structured the deal?
We underestimated how much the rental would be. A lot of people in our market said our market's just an appreciation market, not a cash flow market. When we did short-term, we were able to do both.
What about the AI use cases that have made a significant impact on your operation? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. And we bring together leaders, operators, entrepreneurs, investors, so they tell us about their stories, the lessons that they have learned along the way, and maybe even some of the mistakes that they have made so that we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Michael Vialpando, the co-founder and CTO at Renjoy. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here. Before we get into the story, why don't you tell us where you're based and a little bit about what you're up to these days?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me. We are based here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I started with short-term rentals back in 2018 with my wife, just with a guest house, and now we've grown it into a company with a couple of good friends, and we've got over 150 listings now, and we're continuing to grow. So it's been a wild journey, pre-COVID, post-COVID, growing a business, everything in between. So it's been fun.
Impressive. And that growth has happened from nothing to 150 plus properties in how long?
We started Renjoy 3 years ago exactly. Two friends and I were looking at buying a fiveplex together, and we didn't know who was going to manage it. We each had our own units, and we're like, yeah, let's just throw them all together to get some economies of scale. We're not going to grow it. We don't want to take on external clients. That sounds fun or hard. So, but only a few months after kind of putting it all together, we had enough people asking. We decided to say yes. And then a few months after that, we all kind of shifted our day jobs into this full time. So
wow, you bent over. Interesting. Okay, so let's go back to that founding journey or story. Like, so you say that basically, like take us back to what were you doing back then with your life? Like, what were you up to? And then, when does the whole, real estate acquiring a property conversation come about? Put us in that context.
Yeah, for sure. We'll go back to where I started. I was working as an engineer for an oil and gas company, based out of Houston, but they have a pretty good sized office here in the Springs. And I started making money, which was cool. And my wife and I did the American dream. We bought a house in the suburbs. We were kind of house poor, didn't have a lot left over. We were used to vacationing quite a bit and traveling the world when we were just engaged and didn't have a house yet. I was traveling a lot for work, and man, it's podcasts like this that you start listening, and then all of a sudden, you get a new perspective, a new idea. We're like, hey, we started listening to Bigger Pockets, and we're like, let's try this real estate thing. Went to a few meetups here in town, and it was back in 2018, and not a whole lot of people were doing Airbnb. Obviously, it was definitely around, but still a newer thing. And so we sold the house. My wife finally was the one who pushed us. She said, are we just going to talk about this until we die, or are we actually going to do something? So we sold the house in the suburb, moved downtown, got a house and a guest house. We're like, let's try the guest house on Airbnb. Let's see what that's about. 6 months in, we're like, this is awesome. Let's rinse and repeat as fast as we can. Interest rates were low. Prices were at an all-time high the whole time we were buying for the last 5-6 years, but every 6 months to a year we moved and kind of kept acquiring real estate that way, and we short-termed everything we could. So that's kind of how we got started.
Wow.
personally in
So,
real
so
estate. And
first
then,
deal, like real estate side, first deal that you did. Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, it was a house hack downtown Colorado Springs. So we lived in the main house and we rented out the guest house. We actually, we went a little extreme. We even got roommates off Craigslist for our house. So we filled the other two bedrooms with two guys we're actually still good friends with. So it's not all horror stories.
Hmm.
Um, and then we rented out the guest house. So um, we can go into any of the numbers you'd like, but it's a lot easier, at least here in the States, to do it where if it's a primary residence, you only got to put 5% down. So it just made it a lot faster to be able to buy a
Hmm.
place, put 5% down, save up for the next place, and turn that existing place into a full-time rental.
So that's kind of what you went about, like rinsing and repeating there in terms of the model where you would live there for a little while, save up the next 5%, and go back to buy the next. Did you have to refinance at some point any of those to move on to the next one, or was it all just like
We
from the proceeds?
yeah, we didn't. Each place we bought was between 400 and 600,000. So 20%, 25 to 30K is what we had to save up. And we were making pretty good money from short-term rentals and then saving what we could from our day jobs as well. So that helped us just kind of be able to continue that process pretty quickly rather than, saving up 20, 25% is a lot of cash to save up, but
Hmm.
5% is not too bad.
Okay, okay. And how many times you did this process where you were actually like moving from one place to the next as you were buying them?
We did it 5 times in 5 years. We
Okay.
never really unpacked, I guess. We still have a Christmas tree in the basement of this house and all kinds of different stuff kind of scattered throughout a little bit, but we did it kind of as quickly as we could, just because we didn't have kids yet. We knew we wanted them, and it was just easier to do it before that.
Nice, nice. And so we'll get into the rest of the like everything that happened next. But like if you look back at that, sort of initial journey getting into real estate, what what if anything would you do differently? If you were looking at, those first five transactions, is there anything that you learned from that process that you would maybe tackle differently, or that you would tell yourself, hey, beware of this, beware of that?
I'm sure there's a bunch of little things, but not anything too major. We were really focused on trying to get as many like units as possible. So we'd
Hmm.
be a lot by like a house and a guest house, or like a house where you could kind of split the upstairs and downstairs with like private entrances and try to get more units that way. Um, I mean, we didn't know the future. And so when short-term rental regulations were kind of being formed here in Colorado Springs, we were still on that like most amount of units per property type thing, but we've seen it kind of shift to like the larger houses are the ones making a lot more. Those are actually seeing an increase in revenue per year, whereas our smaller units are not. But that's just kind of how the regulations, like, they're only still allowed in kind of the downtown area, which is a lot of smaller units. So like the grandfathered in, 5, 6 bedroom homes are still, it's harder to add new supply and demand continues to grow. So then you're going to make more money. Whereas it's easier to add units on the smaller end of the spectrum. So we've seen those numbers kind of come down each year since, 21, 22, 23, and 24, 21 being the peak because we were fortunate that Colorado Springs didn't see a big hit from COVID because a lot of people wanted to bug out of the big cities. What could you do? You could go outside, you could hike, and we're a big outdoor area. So we had a lot of people still traveling and a big drive to destination from like Texas and the Midwest. So we had a lot of that.
Hmm. And just curious, in terms of like those first few properties, were you underwriting assuming that you would for sure be able to rent them out as short-term rentals, or were you more of the approach of like, I got a cash flow even if it's rented as a long-term rental, and then the short-term rental is just going to be like a plus?
Yeah. We definitely ran our numbers like worst case scenario as long-term rentals. Um, and they still worked, just based on, interest rates and purchase
Hmm.
price and stuff like that. But it's kind of funny, like over the past, I don't know, 4 years or so, you know, there's a lot of Airbnb kind of went on a high, or short-term rentals in general, you know, when people are making a lot of money, they can't keep their mouths shut. So, everyone was doing it in 2021, just like everyone was talking about Bitcoin before that, right? Like there was just so much buzz in the industry or even just in your local friend groups or in the news and stuff. So eventually that all followed and a lot more supply came into the market. But um, we ran our numbers as long-term rentals and it wasn't super sexy, right? But it'd make a few $100 a month or it'd be flat. And then we were fine with that because we knew like the fundamentals of, long-term fixed rate debt and what that can do to your net worth, your family worth, all that stuff over time was still worth it. So
Hmm.
then once we tasted both, right, you get the compounding effects of real estate with the short-term rental cash flow. When a lot of people in our market said our market's just an appreciation market, not a cash flow market.
Hmm.
When we did short-term, we were able to do both. And so it's kind of hard to go back and like, as we're looking at like future markets or where we want to invest, it's like, man, I still want both. And it's kind of a little bit more elusive to attain when interest
Hmm.
rates are so high and short-term rentals have kind of stabilized instead of just being on a rocket ship.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it's something I like to talk a lot about here to just pick people's brain on this. I mean, if you were, introduced to this real estate world through Bigger Pockets, you've heard of, I'm sure the Burr method, and buy, renovate, refinance, repeat, and so like there's definitely more of that leverage component when you're looking at long-term rentals, multifamily specifically, where you can do that forced appreciation by increasing the rent and whatnot. Not so much on the STR side as far as the forced appreciation. But how has your like investment strategy evolved? What came after, and what was next? Like, so you bought these first 5 properties. You were now intrigued by this combination of good, SDR cash flow, but also like long term sort of passive, equity building. Is that kind of when you started to get approached, like to manage? Is that when you met with your other 2 co-founders and started to look into like buying like a multi type of property? Like what came after?
Yeah, that's a great segue. We were still looking at places of, hey, what's a bigger deal we could do together? Because like we kind of had gotten used to like what's going to stretch us, what's going to grow, what's going to challenge us. We're like, okay, what's the next step from here? And that's when we found that 5 unit that pretty much was a burr. I mean, it took a couple 100,000 of renovation. I mean, there was a hoarder in one unit. We had to completely gut most of it and kind of re-put it all back together, mostly cosmetic, but that's kind of when we were trying to figure out what to do next. And then when we decided to buy it, and it was like, okay, is Luke going to manage it? Is Michael? Is Jacob? How are we going to like pay the other person to do all that work? Like I probably had 7 or 8 units, and then Luke and Jacob each had a handful as well. And so that's when we decided, okay, let's bring all our housekeepers together, bring our maintenance people together. Let's get some kind of try to make our lives easier because at that time it was still a side hustle. So it's like you all have your own contacts, your vendors, and those people are so critical to making everything flow. Um, and so that's when we kind of brought them all together. We were all using our own Hospitable or Smart B&B accounts at that time, and we were kind of like, okay, let's look at like a new PMS. Who's going to manage pricing? And so that's when we merged them all together. Decided to okay, all of our units will come together. We'll buy this new property. We'll all kind of manage it and distribute stuff that way. And then it wasn't even a couple months later that we should have known better, that we're all pretty ambitious and, you know, entrepreneurial, that we'd eventually say yes to some clients. And it kind of took off from there.
Mm-hmm. Now let's go back to so how did you guys know each other? Like, was there an existing relationship there between the three of you? Like, were you friends?
Yeah, we actually met through real estate. We were all kind of going to different meetups and stuff like that because we were just kind of consuming the content, really excited about, you know, house
Mm-hmm.
hacking, real estate, investments. Jacob was doing a lot of flips, but Luke and I were really just doing our own short-term rentals. And so we were in our own, there was five of us that kind of met every week at the brewery. We talked about different real estate deals and stuff like that. And that really provided a kind of a launch pad of having similar people around you, kind of pushing you to try to reach new goals.
Mm-hmm. 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 That's cool. So through those networking events, you actually met them. Each of you had a little bit like of a foundation already on your own before you guys got together, and it's tricky, right? Partnering up with other people, it's
Mm.
kind of like getting married. Like, you got to make sure you're doing it with the right person, otherwise it's going to come back and haunt you. So what do you think was it about the way that you guys maybe complemented each other's skill sets or whatnot that made it clear that this could be a successful partnership?
Yeah, I think it was because it made it so much easier because we already had that foundation as like in our mastermind that that we met every week at the brewery and talked about that stuff. We already knew a lot of each other's strengths, each other's weaknesses, where we had overlap, where we had gaps. And so it made it pretty easy to be able to take that step to, I mean, I totally agree. We're fully married at this point. I mean, I spend more time with Jacob and Luke than I do my wife, right? Like if you're here 8 hours a day, always on Slack, always on email, I talk to them more than I do my wife because I only see her a few hours, you know, in the morning and at night. So it's crazy to think it is so much. Marriage is the perfect word for it because you're really joined in so many different ways. So it made it a lot easier. I mean, you hear so many horror stories of partnerships gone wrong and, you know, setting expectations from the start, but at the end of the day, you're still, you know, moving into fog and you can only see so far and you just have to keep moving forward, and more stuff, you know, you have to deal with when it comes up. Cause if you try to wait to plan everything or wait for all the lights to be green before you start going, you're never going to get anywhere. So there's kind of a blend of how confident can you be, and, you know, what can you do to minimize that risk, but at the same time, you gotta take a step eventually.
Mm-hmm. So that step was that property you guys bought, fiveplex, five property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers there, because now you're getting into like more of so of the commercial financing. At least in Canada, it's five plus. I'm not sure in the US. I think it's 5.2. But what was different there in terms of how you guys structured the deal, and first sort of bigger acquisition as well. What did you learn, and what would you have done differently?
Um, like most of our projects, we kind of underestimated how much the renter would be. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there was plumbing issues. I don't think we had termites, but electrical, plumbing, all that kind of stuff, which kind of adds up a lot more
Mm-hmm.
than just the cosmetic. What kind of wall art are we putting up to, you know, get more clicks and more conversion rates? But um, the financing was definitely different. That was the first time we did something like that. So we had a first position with a bank and a second position with a private lender, and then we each put in I think it was 50K, like a good chunk each in cash, and then had those first and second um, lenders for that
Mm-hmm.
property. Our plan was to refi out of it as soon as the construction was done. And that's right when kind of rates shot up.
Mm.
Lenders were getting a little shaky about multifamily in general. A lot of them had too much exposure to multifamily. And I think there's still way too many multifamily units going up that aren't even done being built yet. So we still have that first and second, and um, haven't been able to refi out of it. But we really don't want to touch that first because it's got such a great interest rate that we're fine with paying just the interest only on the second, um, at least for the time being. Um,
Okay, the second was interest only, so that alleviated the pressure.
yeah, high, right? 10%. That's high, but um, the lender's happy getting that, and we're happy to pay that because our first is so low. The 10%'s on only on 200, whereas I think the 500 in the first position is 4%, 4.5%, something like that. So like our blended rate's not too bad.
Okay.
Uh,
And
from
was
that
it intended
perspective.
to be the private one was intended to be a short term loan and you had to
Yeah.
extend?
Yeah, it was supposed to just be a bridge loan until we kind of stabilized the property, got everything, cash flowing and going well. But we've just kind of left that in place because most lenders we talk to now, or at least all of them we've talked to, they want to roll both of them together, and we just don't want to touch that first one. We just want someone to refi that second one, but nobody wants to be in second position on a refi, especially short term's gotten a lot better. But man, you tell most banks that you're doing a short term rental, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't like that. At
They don't
least
want to
not
know
from
about
all
it.
the personal finances. They're like, oh, I'll take a long term lease that was signed and they haven't even moved in yet. And you just need to screenshot the Venmo of a security deposit. And you're like, but I'm not going to take your, 3 years of Schedule E STR income that the IRS thinks is pretty darn real. Thanks, loan. I'm like, come on, this is crazy. So
That's funny. And
yeah,
and
we're
but are you
kind of in a
seeing that
whole.
evolve though? Like, because I'm hearing about more and more like products that are specific to the industry, and like considering even like I've heard as wild as like RDNA forecasts that are
Yeah,
considered by
yeah,
some
which
of
is
these bold
crazy. I mean,
lenders.
as we both know, the operator matters so much more on a short-term rental than long-term, right? Stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, a 3-bed, 2-bath is going to be like the range of rent in is so minimal of like regardless of the operator. That delta is so small. But on a short-term rental, I mean, you can double or triple just based on the operator, depending on how good or bad they were doing. So I understand it from a bank's perspective. It's like they're evaluating you as an operator, or who is your operator and how well are those projections going to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think we're just kind of stuck in a little bit of a pickle just because we really don't want to touch that. Anyone that wants to refi the whole thing, the whole interest rate's going up to 7-8% at least, instead of
Mm-hmm.
under this split of, the 10% on 200 and the 4.5% on 500. It's still not that bad. It's also in a 15-year note, which is which is paying down a lot of principal
Hmm.
every month, which I hadn't done before. I think it's a 15, 25-year AM. So we're definitely just paying down more principal a lot faster than I am on any of my 30-year, single family homes.
Interesting, interesting. And so I guess for now the plan is to leave it as is and wait for. I mean, we just had the first rate cut in 4 years, so that's good
Yeah.
sign.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, you never know. People say the election might change something, but I don't know. I think we're fine with holding for now. The property is doing well, and it was kind of just a catalyst into like what we can do next.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, thankfully, we did combine together to build Renjoy because it was kind of like the next step. It's kind of switched a lot of, at least my personal attention from real estate into business in general.
Okay,
So, yeah.
okay. Talk to me about that transition though, like because you were basically going into this real estate thing with the mindset of like building wealth for yourself and
Yeah.
whatnot. And then okay, so now you're on the business side. So I guess my first question before going to the story of like building and scaling Renjoy, which is impressive in and of itself, is have you like put real estate like kind of completely on the side now that you've been focusing on the business?
Um, a little bit, just because that's where all my attention has gone. I think it's interesting. I mean, what makes real estate so powerful is the leverage you can get with debt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of the same in business. It's a lot of the same principles of what kind of leverage can you make, how much value can you add to the marketplace. Um, Definitely a lot different and a lot more variables. I mean, you're
Mm-hmm.
talking people and systems and processes and all that stuff, but um, personally, that's where my attention has gone. And it kind of worked out with interest rates going up so much that it's hard to make a lot of stuff work
Mm-hmm.
um, currently. And we're also just so leveraged on that real estate side now that it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense to look at something else.
Yeah, no,
Um,
and just parenthesis, this is something I saw recently in a video I found interesting. They said that most millionaires, and you hear that a lot, most millionaires come from real estate, but then it also said most billionaires come from private equity.
yeah.
So you're in the. I mean, I'm not saying you're acquiring or doing private equity, but like
A little
you're in
ways to
business now. You're in
Yeah,
business
there's just
now.
so much
Mhm.
more scale, right? There's
Upside.
also
There's
way
more
more risk,
upside. Like
way more
it's
upside,
non-linear.
way more risk because you can take it to zero. You can take
Mm-hmm.
it to past zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
On real estate, at least you've got a floor,
Mm-hmm.
but you're also not going to get a 15x return on a house unless you have it for 100 years. But
Exactly.
you could do that on business. So the floor and ceiling go in completely different directions with business, but it's also just fun, right? Being challenged in a different way, learning new things. I think that's, we were talking a little bit before this about personal growth and stuff, and that has a huge influence on it. Of like, I don't know. I think a lot of the younger generations get criticized by the older ones for not sticking around in jobs, not doing something for 45 years. But if you flip that around and say, I know I'm not going to be doing something for 45 years, like, what do I want to do along the way? It's like, well, what skills do you need to learn? How can you be stretched and challenged and grow? And I think business is a way that will definitely do that to you.
They
real
will
estate
stretch
was
you.
real estate was new, and then business is a whole nother thing.
Ah, that's interesting. Now, talking about skills, let's go back to so the three, the three founding partners. There's this. I've heard this before, where to scale a startup, you need a hustler, you need a hipster, you need a hacker. So the hustler, sales, the hipster is more like product, and then the hacker, puts the things together and the tech and whatnot. So what do you think that somewhat, describes you guys, or what does that look like on your end?
I love it. I know who the hustler is. That's definitely Jacob. He's the one always driving it and trying to push us to do more, do it faster, do it better. I'm not sure about the hipster though. I'm still trying to figure that out. We follow a lot of like Traction, EOS, um, Rocket Fuel, some of those like books that kind of help build that framework for startups and small businesses. And we're always kind of thinking of it as like visionary and integrator, but
Hmm.
that's tricky too when there's three of us. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, which one's doing what? And we took all those tests and all three of us scored in the 70s or 80s and all three of them, and we're like, well, shoot, there's not a clear cut like visionary or a clear cut integrator, so we're still trying to figure that out a little bit.
Are you guys all
um
more inclined towards visionary or more inclined towards integrator?
we were almost tied on every single, all three of us were like 74, 76 on like all all three of us were those on each of them. So I'm not sure if the book just wants one of us to think of things and not be able to act on them, or act on things but not think of new ones. um
Hmm.
but I liked your analogy with hipster and hacker. I think I'd be more on the hacker side. I've been fascinated with AI ever since that November when it came out, and your wheels start turning of what can we do, how can we combine this with, you know, some low code solutions like Airtable or Notion and combine it with some Zaps and some make automations and get stuff really working together and just it's leverage, right? At the end of the day, it's like how much can you get done with as little input as possible, and you're constantly
Yes.
trying to stretch that as far as you can. And so, trying to stand out from the marketplace, it's you're trying to figure out whatever you can.
Okay, we want to get into some of those use cases for AI, but before that, you just every time I hear the word leverage, I cannot not talk about it. So Naval Ravikant, in the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, yeah, he talks about the kinds of leverage, and to your point, there's capital, there's talent. You can raise capital, you can hire people, you can do content, right? You can put together SOPs or podcasts or whatever, but then you have code, right, which you put together once, and then no marginal cost of replication. So yes, very very interesting concept. How much output you can get per unit of input, and I'm obsessed by this idea of leverage, and I think more founders should be thinking about how they can spend their time in areas where they have the most leverage, rather than like, because I'm sure that you would not have been able to scale to the level that you have had you been stuck in kind of doing the same activities that you were doing when you first got
Mhm.
started.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that was a lot of the thinking that Jacob helped us challenge. In the very beginning, I was like, okay, what's the cheapest PMS we could use? Or what's like certain things like that. And it's like, well, is this going to work at 300? Will this work at 500? Or
Mm-hmm.
like, or is it okay to have, to be able to like plan when you're going to sunset or like move from one product into the next, like, but not do something that requires a bunch of effort up front and then isn't able to like roll into the next one. I think that's something we're always balancing because you can also spend way too much time over developing something that
Mm-hmm.
isn't going to be around for long. So
Mm-hmm. And what's your
yeah,
thinking on that? Like, let's say on the PMS side, like if your vision is to scale, should you go straight for the like scalable solution, even though it's like way too expensive versus what you could get that solves every single checkbox today?
yeah, yeah. It's tricky. I mean, we were actually trying to build our stuff as most like tool agnostic as possible, right? Like we were just so when we went to Verma for the first time last year down in Orlando, we're like, okay, we're going to find the new PMS that we're going to use for the next. And then you end up talking to everyone there, all the other property managers, and they're like, oh, I've switched from Guesty to Track. I've switched from Streamline to LMPM. I've switched from Hospitable to Hostaway. Like they're all jumping around, and it's like such a waste of resources, right? Like every time you're doing that, you're moving laterally, not like forward. And
Mm.
so that's always something of like, what can you do to like keep moving forward instead of just sitting there like treading water? And so we were trying to build everything with just API integrations off of the PMS of like, I don't want to store like all this data in there and then have to try to extract it all back out. And you're not able to like be as nimble. So we were trying to set up a lot of syncs and API connections so we could have our own single source of truth and then kind of connect it into different tools, whether we were using, Akia or Enzo, or we're using like a different guidebook tool, like where can we keep all the data in one spot so we can continue to add to it and get better, but not like get stuck into like, you're never getting this data out of there. And so you kind of are building yourself into a trap, I guess, of what happens if a different tool innovates faster and you want to switch to it.
Mm.
And it's because it's always a blend of like what can you buy off the shelf and what can you like build yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then like how much can you do in between that maybe is the least amount of work but might get you the most leverage, right? So as you can tell, I could go on for this stuff
Yeah,
for a
no, but
while,
this
but
is this
trying
is
to be a
this
little
is
more like high
exactly
level. But
yeah, no, this is exactly what I want us to touch on, because that decision to buy versus build your tech is maybe not a decision that every operator asks themselves, because not everyone is going to have the scale that justifies developing. But those that are thinking of scale or are scaling definitely ask themselves that question. So how do you draw that line? Like when do you tell yourself now this makes sense to build?
Uh, I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. I mean, we've
How
worked with
yeah,
some
what's your thought process?
what's crazy is like I'm not even a coder, right? Like I'm
Hmm.
not I went to school for engineering. We did some of it, but not much. And so it's just kind of like I think having that creativity and knowing what's possible or asking what is possible, especially with, Upwork and Fiverr and global talent becoming so big, there's a lot of things you can do for minimal costs if you just know the right questions to ask. And that's where AI and ChatGPT has just been super helpful of just like, you know, using it almost as a performance coach and asking like, here's my problem. Here's what I am doing. Am I missing anything? Like having that extra perspective of like, what else could you do? Um, that's just, I feel like it's different on every problem you run into, but maybe kind of the same questioning or thought process can help, um, figure out like how much impact could having this new tool have, or what if you had an integration that, auto replied to reviews or messages or, build your guidebooks or something like that. Like,
Hmm.
is it repeatable? I think is a good one. Like if you're going to be doing this over and over, try your best to, what is the one step we always forget that Elon says is delete first. We're always straight to make it more efficient and automate it, but like delete as much as you can first. Do you actually need it? And then from there, work on,
Hmm.
if it's repeatable, try to automate it.
Yeah, yeah. The formula, I think he calls it something like that. And then he's like, if you didn't delete enough, it means now if you don't end up adding certain things back, it means you didn't delete enough. Super interesting.
Yeah.
When he was talking, I think it was in his biography. Yeah, when he was trying to like streamline the the supply chain for the production of Tesla, come like he had promised like some like ridiculous like production numbers that were going to be ready like a couple of weeks ahead, and he was like far from it, and he starts going through this process that it's a theme that comes over and over again. I find that super interesting because yeah, you can very easily find yourself in the trap of just adding and adding and adding, and especially when you have so many technology solutions out there. It's you're gonna find a piece of software that's gonna solve one niche problem, and then you end up with like 20 of them.
Yeah, it's crazy. Oh my gosh. We have uh, I put together a quick little like tech stack. I'm pretty visual, so I have in Miro. I took all the company logos that we use
Hmm.
different softwares for, and was putting them all out there on the board and dragging them around. And it's insane how many tools we use, on a daily basis, from Slack to Google Suite to LastPass to Rippling to Guesty to Wheelhouse to Price Labs. Like there's just so many tools that you have. And
Hmm.
then each one you add just adds a little more complexity and friction of like you hire someone new and now you got to like teach all these like extra steps and processes. So it's like, and do we really need two of these, or can we kind of merge some of these together? Um, and it's tricky because you always want like the best in class tool, but at what cost? How much friction are you adding to all your systems of like, oh, I updated it in this system, but I forgot to update it over here or over here. Like which ones are actually talking both ways? Which
Hmm.
ones, if you just add something to Breezeway, is that going back into Guesty or is that just staying there? Like knowing all those little quirks, I feel so bad each time we bring on someone new and you're trying to explain it. It makes you rethink like, wow, that is kind of weird. Why do we do it that way? I don't know. We added it and somebody thought it was a good idea and it's not too expensive. And yeah,
Wow. Well, it's I guess it's a good exercise to I guess continuously review that tech stack and you know delete, and then
hopefully
if you
delete
don't
more.
find yourself adding it back, you didn't delete enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's follow Elon's advice.
It's so much harder than it sounds.
No, it must be. It must be. Now, okay, so what about the AI use cases? that you've found that that have made an impact, significant impact on your operation?
Um, a lot of the stuff we've actually done that's mostly repeatable is pretty surface level, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
descriptions, review responses,
Mm-hmm.
tagging reviews and getting maintenance items made out of those. Like stuff like that's pretty simple and straightforward. We're still trying to figure out like how can you make it even more, use it as a conduit to get from one to the other where, if you had AI responding to every guest message or at least most of them and, had some kind of escalation um, for certain stuff outside of it, how can you, instead of just, I think what we've done, I don't, I'd say poorly, but haven't perfected yet is how do you remove those manual steps that get it from like being like a nice to have feature to, completely done. Not completely done, but like, don't just notify me in Slack if a guest has an issue. Like, turn it into a task for someone else to keep moving it down the chain instead of, almost solving the problem, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, what about you guys there? Do you have similar type of
Yeah,
stuff of,
yeah, yeah. Well,
it's like,
it is
great.
it is
So
surface
Cole with
level.
Host AI. Yeah. Cole with Host AI, great guy. And he's getting his product really good, but like, great. So they're auto responding to all these messages. We haven't implemented this yet. Hopefully we can figure out a solution. That's our Q4 goal is to make a lot of progress on the guest comms front. But like, don't just put it in Slack. Now, how do we like put it in Breezeway and then have like a dispatcher like review that, filter it, make sure it's got the right,
Mm-hmm.
pictures, context, or some extra info, and then get it assigned to someone instead of you still got this manual step in there of like, if you just tell me what the issue is and didn't solve it, that doesn't really help me all that much,
Mm-hmm. 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 No, for sure. I mean, we've seen this at Angel Host, and at this point it starts to become a significant scale at 1,200 properties, and so it what we found is it doesn't replace the human. It just doesn't replace the human yet. So especially on the guest comms side, yes, it's gonna draft first, response. It's going to draft something, but you're still going to need that human intervention to make sure it's proper. Like it makes sense. Sometimes it just doesn't, and you still want the human to be the one, reviewing it and sending it. Otherwise, it's just gonna say nonsense. Sometimes it's getting better, but the tricky thing I find with all of these tools, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, that are being built on top of, let's say, ChatGPT. I'm zero technical. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but whenever like ChatGPT updates something, like you're building a business completely on top of something that you have zero control on. I
Yeah.
find that super. I find that like kind of scary when you think about it. Like if I'm
Yeah, there's
them,
definitely some risk there. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't
How
know.
are we going to solve all the problems?
I don't know. But okay, so talk about tech stacks. What is something that you haven't found a provider that can solve? You have all these tools in your tech stack. What's something that you're still looking for, haven't found?
I guess now that, you kind of get spoiled when you use ChatGPT or Gemini or AI for something, like how much it can kind of reference and like have a follow-up conversation. Um, we use Airtable as our like main database, I guess, for, all of our connections to Guesty and Akia and different tools like that. I want to be able to just pop up a little question and just ask about any property and not have to know, which table it's coming from, or is that a unit or a property or a listing or an owner? Like, how far is it up the CRM or down? I think just consolidating that a little bit more, I think would be awesome. I don't know if it's almost kind of like, I think I've seen, is it Bestie AI or something like that, where it's almost like you put AI on top of your PMS and then you can just ask questions, kind of like a really good chatbot. But I think we've
Mm-hmm.
all kind of got this preconceived notion of like chatbots weren't good for so long that you never want to click that thing in the bottom right and like ask a
Mm-hmm.
question because it just references a random blog post from 3 years ago. And you're like, this
Mm-hmm.
isn't even updated. But, you know, you overlay some kind of AI on top of that. And all of a sudden it's like reading all the reference and giving you the answer instead of just like pointing you in the direction. I think that would be super helpful on any PMS of just like, if you're the owner relations advocate or you're the maintenance dispatcher or you're a housekeeping coordinator, like being able to just use the same tool to be able to like find all that information instead of, oh, well, this owner's connected to these 2 properties and these 2 properties have these 6 units and these 6 units have these 7 listings. And you're trying to like kind of diagram all that data back and forth. Like if there was an easier way to like combine all that into like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't care where it's coming from. I don't care if it's a device on a property or a certain thing, be able to like query that information faster. I don't know. I
Yeah.
wish I could just ask it questions, kind of like in Notion, maybe a little bit like where it doesn't matter where the info is, just give me the answer. I don't want to go like looking for it on like which tab or which spreadsheet or like just pull it and give me the info.
Wow. That's you just made someone a millionaire there with that idea if they put it in play, if they execute it. No, but I can think of, like, let me know what other use cases you can think of, but like owner relations you just mentioned, right? Like let's say the owner relations person is not the revenue manager, right? And the owner relations person gets a question from the owner: why did you get this booking at this price point? You would hope that your owner relations is trained enough to be able to properly answer that question. In practice, sometimes that's not necessarily the case, and so you gotta now involve the revenue manager. What if you had that chatbot that you could ask, why was this rate, decreased, and what was the logic behind it? And it just, I don't know. That's one use case. What's another
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
case you can
And
think
then
of
and
that?
then and then say it. I'm trying to think like what a human would actually do. You'd go and check the rate from last year. Was it booked? Oh, actually, you were posted at, 2:15 a night for this week last year, and you only got 3 of the 7 nights booked in that week. This year it was booked at 185 for 7 days straight. Your RevPAR is still better, right? Like something like that, where it could just like the data's there, just synthesize it faster and better instead of me having to go pull up key data or wheelhouse or
Mm-hmm.
guest analytics and screenshot and filter and try to
Mm-hmm.
like build my case, like build it for me. I think that
Mm-hmm.
would be super helpful. So you wouldn't have to have so much internal communication to solve a problem.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I've seen price labs, maybe not exactly this, but like start to incorporate sort of like synthesis through AI. So there's now the ability to, like, you can see like the summary of like what a graph is telling you, that is just AI kind of generated. So I guess it's the direction that they're trying to go in as well. It's interesting. We'll see it's evolving so exponentially that, like, we're just talking here, but like, yeah, that we'll see where it goes. Now let's talk about the massive scale that you guys had. What broke first, and kind of like what were the different stages of if you had to like put it in stages of growth that you've had from 0 to 150, what have been those major sort of milestones or transitions, and what has broken along the way that you've had to sort of rethink or structure differently?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we all came together and then we got the fiveplex online, we had like 25 units, and then adding from there to like 50. Not a whole lot changed. We were just kind of like adding to it. And then I think we broke maybe just not having any systems or processes for anything. It was just us all running around like crazy, fixing things, onboarding units without any kind of um, process or system. It was just go as fast as you can. Um, And then let's see, housekeeping. We just overpaid and stole all the cleaners from our competitors, which eventually came to bite us in the butt a couple months ago.
Mm.
Because we just kept solving the problem with throwing more money at it, and we had very minimal um oversight and management, right? Like we had 140 units and 120, 140, and we still had just like one manager and then just like a bunch of 1099 cleaners that were paid by job. And we had the scheduling set up in a way that like each clean that popped up, each turnover, kind of like a bidding system. It'd go to the primary cleaner first. They could accept or reject in the first 24 hours. Then it'd go to the secondary. They'd accept or reject and then go to everyone else. And so it kind of like self-policed everything getting scheduled and done on time. And then when we kind of made the switch over the last couple months to bringing a lot of cleaners in-house, paying by the hour instead of like piece rates, then we needed a lot more like admin support of like who's scheduling all this coordination, like are they in the same neighborhood, all that kind of stuff. That was a big change to our operations that was maybe a little overdue. Not exactly sure how we could have timed that better, but that's probably the most recent and biggest one where we kind of broke that. But now, going into another market, you can't necessarily start from that. Like it's easier to optimize something when you already have it rather than like optimizing something you don't necessarily have yet. Like, new listings in a new market, you can't start the same way. But
Mhm.
sorry, I was kind of a roundabout way of saying kind of what we've broke along the way. We definitely tried to departmentalize as soon as possible. It seems like a lot of property managers, especially in maybe the more established vacation rental markets, where there's one person and they did everything for like, 15 to 30 units, right? They did overseeing the cleaners, they did maintenance stuff, they did owner statements, they did, all that kind of stuff. And we tried to do the opposite of like, we didn't see that as very scalable. So like housekeeping department, maintenance department, owner relations, marketing, sales, like trying to split all those up into different departments that could scale a lot better as we scaled.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean the growth you've had is very interesting and fast, and it can look impressive from the outside, but it always looks messy from the inside. So
Chaos every day.
yeah, no, for sure. And so it's just interesting, knowing that no matter how successful you end up being, it's always going to be like one day at a time, one problem at a time, one issue at a time that you're trying to solve for, trying to look ahead. But there's only so much you can look ahead because you don't necessarily know what's the next. Like if I asked you today, like you double the size of your portfolio now you're looking at 300 properties. Like what would need to be different from the setup you have now for that to be possible? Or do you think you could just double the size of your portfolio now with the same systems, the same sort of structure, and just add a couple people here and there, and you'd be good to go?
I think we have overdeveloped a lot of stuff. So
Mhm.
we kind of joke like what systems would break if we doubled. And a lot of the stuff we've set up, we almost kind of boxed ourselves into a spot where we have to grow because what we built makes more sense for a larger scale. Like the custom forms we built to like gather as much info from the owner as possible. And like the forms we have like our onboarding team do, like all this stuff we've built is so that a brand new comms agent who has no idea about the property can quickly answer a question about what day is trash day and is there two recycling bins or one? Is recycling picked up on the same day as trash day? Like being able to grab that info all the way from the beginning and bring it all the way to the end, right? Like we've built a lot of stuff to be able to, capture all that data. And then if the structure is not quite right or it needs refinement, or we should always have a picture of the breaker panel. So when someone plugs in too many hair dryers, we don't just tell them where it is. We actually have a photo like in the guidebook or stuff like that. We've like tried to move that as far upstream as possible. So we're like front loading as much information as we can, or gathering as much. And then regardless of who's doing it downstream, whether it's owner relations has a question or the comms team or maintenance, like we should have that data somewhere.
Mhm.
It's a little different
Now
story
we
trying
just
to
need
catch the tail.
the AI chatbot to find where the data is, but it
Yeah,
is somewhere.
exactly. So a lot of the stuff we've built is for that larger scale of, it used to all be in our heads of like, who onboarded it, just ask them, or who's the primary cleaner, just ask them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to get as much of that information like in our database so it can be used in whatever way we need in the future.
And would you recommend like would you recommend this to any property manager in terms of like the whole idea of building your own database that is, PMS agnostic so that you can be sort of independent, or is this something that starts to make sense at a certain scale?
I don't think you need it for less than 100.
Okay.
That's a great question, because now I start thinking about it ourselves, and like just the amount of information, or you start to rely a lot more on people at that point, right? Like how much information is just in our maintenance, our lead maintenance guy's head, that he knows about every property, every little quirk, every, breaker panel or lockbox or stuff like that. I don't think you need all that stored if you're not planning to go above 100. That's just, you'd spend too much time maybe trying to build all that out. At least having it in like a very orderly fashion of like different forms you have along the way, or like different ways of gathering that info, rather than just like, jot it down somewhere and make sure somebody knows about it and it's in a email or Slack thread somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But if we have future aspirations of like being able to like use that in more efficient ways, like we said, like asking an Airtape or a AI bot on top of your database, it's like it would need to be there to be able to pull the information. So that's how we're kind of building things.
Mm-hmm. And what's the vision, Michael? What's ahead for you guys?
Oh man, I'm not sure. Right now we're really focusing on drilling down really refining our operations here in the Springs to, this new model of like a lot more in-house rather than contractors, trying to see how efficient we can get that, just because we have such strong density, right? Like 120 units within a 30-minute driving area, right? So you can get a lot more efficiency that way. And then the second big push is our cash flow is so seasonal, right? So we're predominantly one market. 120 of our 160 are here in the Springs. So we're trying to push for the Florida Gulf Coast. So my wife and I have a property in Bradenton, just south of Tampa, north of Fort Myers in the Sarasota area. And so that would really help our cash flow of as a business and personally as an investor, right? Like summers are great. And then winters, I'm just like, we're too far from the ski resorts. We're just praying summer comes back around. And so having, a place that's real strong in the winter, those January, February, March months would be great personally and for the business. And we chose kind of that market instead of, Summit County, Breckenridge. A lot of the ski towns are a lot closer to us than that. But we see those as like more competitive and like new school, and think there's a little bit more room for disruption and kind of the more established old school. You call and Sue picks up the phone at the front desk and they don't have any systems or AI or processes. It's sticky notes everywhere or something like that. Like, I think that's a little bit more of a low hanging fruit than trying to
Mm-hmm.
go after maybe the urban markets. I think we're so competitive and, you know, a lot of like dog eat dog that like the systems got a lot more refined. Whereas I think maybe the old school ones that have been around forever have a little more room for disruption, but that's just my theory. So we'll see
Mhm.
if it works.
And other than that, when you're analyzing, let's say, new markets that you would want to potentially go to, I mean, you mentioned seasonality, sort of diversification, balancing your seasonality. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned, there being maybe a lot of opportunities for disruption with, perhaps it being a market with a lot of, let's say, uh, traditional operators that haven't necessarily embraced tech to its fullest capacity. From a size of market perspective, or like other kind of things that you look at, what else is important for you when you're thinking about, where to expand next?
Yeah, it's a good question because we really kind of narrowed our sights pretty quickly, just based on some, you know, what we could pull from AirDNA on like, you know, fundamental, because we all came from real estate first, we want like the fundamentals to be strong. Like I want a place that's appreciating and growing in population, not declining. Like, you know, we talk about like in the beginning, we were talking about, you know, appreciation versus cash flow markets. Like a lot of the Midwest, Cleveland, St. Louis, Kansas City have been a lot more like cash flow markets, whereas, you know, markets that have high real estate prices or a lot of people are moving to might be more, you know, you might be cash flow negative on the property, but hopefully it appreciates enough. I don't love playing that game. I'd rather play
Mm.
both, but we just thought like, you know, we wanted to pick a place where we would want to own, where we would, you know, see a lot of those strong real estate fundamentals. And so that's kind of how we picked that. How we'll pick a market beyond that will be, we haven't got there yet,
We'll see. That's for
but
part two. That's for part
maybe down in Colombia.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not sure about the appreciation there, but it's gonna you're gonna you're gonna be able to buy something, that's for sure, for not too expensive.
Yeah.
All right, man. Listen, this has been a lot of fun. I could keep you here for hours. I really liked that we were able to touch on some of those tech related topics, because I mean that's your expertise. And yeah, man, I'm excited to see you in VRMA, right? In not too long.
Yeah. Yep.
And
We're bringing the whole team this year. Or, you know, the whole leadership team. Last year was just the three of us, but we're bringing, I think, 6 or 7 of us this year. So it should be fun.
going all in. That's awesome, man. Well, listen, it was great to have you on. Thank you so much, and we'll stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good one.